Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Merthyr Tydfil Labour Club. We haven't had an S O Davies memorial lecture for 2 years for obvious reasons, but we decided to have one again this year. We were a little bit tentative in March when we decided, because we still weren't out of the woods at that stage. So there was a debate. Well, there wasn't really a debate. Who shall we have? Jeremy Corbyn? Okay then. That was the debate. So it gives me great pleasure today to welcome you all and give a round of applause, please, for Jeremy Corbyn MP.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks very much. And thank you so much for inviting us today. First of all, apologies that we were late coming. We had to take a different route, but we've arrived now, and I'm sorry, but I hope the bar's done well while I've been waiting. While you've been waiting, rather. I haven't been doing such a thing. And thank you to Merthyr Trades Council, not just for today's event, but for all the other great work the Trades Council does and has done over many, many years. It's an example of a Trades Council that's totally part of the community and able to make sure that whenever there's workers needing support and help, you're there to give it to them. So can we hear it from Merthyr Trades Council? And there are some obviously, everyone is very, very welcome here today, and thank you all for coming along, and I hope we have an interesting afternoon. I would like to pay special welcome and thanks to my good friend Beth Winter from across the valley, MP for Cunnon Valley. Thanks for coming, Beth, and thanks for being a fantastic MP and a great comrade in Parliament. And also welcome one of Esso Davis's successors, Declan Salmon, the Mayor of Merthyr, who's here as well. Mr. Mayor. And we have artists here, Rhiannon Brown and Amy Sutton are here. Thank you, because art is part of our movement. And I'd also like to pay a special welcome to somebody who has studied and done a great deal on looking at the life of S O Davies, and that's my friend Robert Griffiths. Where are you, Robert? Oh, there. Hi, Rob. How are you? Lovely to see you. There's so much one could say about the Trades Council, but this isn't just about the history of the Trades Council, but this is also about the way in which the Trades Council has played such an important part in the labour movement history. The way in which Keir Hardie was supported, the way in which the miners, all of the miners' disputes and strikes were supported, right from the inception of the Trades Council well over a century ago. And so it is that support that is now played out today in support for the rail workers, the communication workers through CWU, the teachers and all the others that are in dispute at the present time, because it is very much part of the community. And quite rightly, you're commemorating the life and times of one of the former MPs for the area, S O Davies. Now, S O Davies was a quite incredible person throughout his life. At the age of 12, he was sent down the pits. He was at Quempenar Colliery for some years as a child miner, something that would now be totally illegal. He became an MP in 1934 and was MP until 1972. He was a councillor throughout quite a lot of that time, from 1931 until 1949. So he was an MP and a councillor at the same time, and was mayor in 1945, 1946. And he was very much on the working class left of the Labour Party, and was a consistent champion of progressive causes and supported many issues, anti-poverty issues and so on. And he fell out with Harold Wilson after Aberfan, because the Aberfan disaster of 1966 was obviously a disaster of mega proportions, brought about by neglect and so on. All those children that died, there was a national campaign to raise funds for them. 1.7 million pounds was raised, an awful lot of money in 1966. I remember in the little town I lived in Shropshire at that time, out there collecting money for Aberfan disaster at that time. Obviously, the cause was the spoiled tips, the slag tips. They had to be removed. And Harold Wilson came up with some not very clever idea that some of the money from the fund should be used to remove the tips, which was, if you think about it, outrageous. I mean, would you take the money from the Grenfell Fund now to rebuild Grenfell Tower? No, you wouldn't even think about it. Nobody would even think about it. And so this idea was put forward. Esso, quite rightly, strongly objected to it, refused to attend the Freedom of the Borough to Harold Wilson at that time, was removed as a Labour MP and became an independent backbench MP. I know that feeling. Then stood for election in 1970 in the general election of that year. He was then over 80, I think he was 84 at that time. And very few papers outside of South Wales reported any of it. But I just remember, because I followed that election very, very closely. I was only, 16, 17 at the time. Followed it very, very closely. I just remember one of his election leaflets, a sort of square piece of paper like that. His photo in the middle, it just said, "Don't forget SO." That was all. That was the entire message. And he won. And so I think I have to sort of think of his life going from a child collier to being a union organiser and representative, to becoming a councillor, then becoming an MP, and then being consistently loyal to the community that had first elected him. And so I think we should always remember the bravery of those people and what they went through. The blacklisting, the behaviour of the mining companies, the very poor housing and health conditions that they were fighting up against in every part of the mining industry, and particularly in South Wales, and not far away Tredegar, which is generally seen as the home of the National Health Service, in the sense that Bevan modelled the National Health Service on the principle of miners' welfare and their support for the entirety of the community. And so the Labour movement has a lot to thank that generation of S O Davis and so many others for. They gave us those principles of community strength and community solidarity. And I want us to win elections in the future. I want us to go on and achieve great things in the future. But you cannot do it unless you have that strength within the community, and political organisation is absolutely part of that community. And that is what was understood by Keir Hardie, understood by Esso Davis, and understood by so many of us that did so much for all of us. But if you think about it, in those days there was no social media, obviously, there was no television, there was no easy form of communication, and the printed newspapers were by and large, well, almost totally hostile to socialist ideas, to trade unions, to the Labour Party, to the Communist Party, to every other left political organisation. And so I sort of look back and think, how on earth did you ever manage to win elections with the hostility of the press at that time? The Daily Mail was there at that time, attacking everyone. It still does it, actually. It's a bad habit. They can't get out of it. Yet they did it. How? By that day-to-day organisation and community, supporting people through the miners' welfare, supporting people going through hardship and poverty, supporting each other through industrial disputes, much as the same way as all over Britain now, there are communities coming together, supporting food banks, supporting food cooperatives, supporting people going through mental health stress. And I tell you what, I'll come back to this, the strikes on the railways and the post office and coming for teachers and others at the moment, yes, they're about wages, of course they are, but they're also about every hungry child, every stressed person in this country. They're about the inequality and injustice within our society. And when S O Davies died, Jim Griffiths spoke at his funeral and said that in his life and his work, he had managed to encompass the spirit and values of so many people. So members of the Communist Party, the Labour Party, the ILP, the National Party, and many others all came to his funeral to recognise what a great person he'd been and what he had achieved in his life. Now, we've got to now look up to date, in a sense, of what's going on in this country at the present time. In his maiden speech, Esso said, and I quote, "All around can still see vestiges of the days when the Industrial Revolution expressed itself in a considerable scale in the heavy industries. For several generations, that constituency, this is here, made a tremendous contribution towards the industrialisation of this country and of many parts of the world. But during the last 10 years, this was 1930s, remember, we have seen collieries closed down. We have seen great iron and steel works which have figured so magnificently in the iron and steel industry closed down, and no concrete assistance has been forthcoming from the government. No step whatsoever has been taken to try to modernise the technique of the ironworks and collieries. No effort has been made to establish other industries in those areas." And that is what he was saying in 1934 about the effects of the deindustrialisation of the last 10 years. And remember that he was also the vice president of the Wales Miners' Federation during the general strike and all that period afterwards. So somebody with an enormous grounding within our movement. And the highest in Merthyr was actually the most industrialised place almost in the country in the 19th century. But now, 2022, the third lowest life expectancy of anywhere in Wales. And so life expectancy, inequality and poverty are absolutely here. And the levels of poverty amongst children and all families are still very, very considerable. 1 in 3 of all children in Wales are living in poverty. There is a massive mental health crisis all across Wales and all across the whole country. And the effects that has on young people are astonishing and truly frightening. I represent an inner city constituency where we have our own levels of poverty and all the stress that goes with it. And the stress of young people in modern Britain is absolutely incredible, and we should think very, very carefully about that. In my view, generally speaking, children are overstressed in school, over-tested in school, and a streaming system that tends to disregard the potential of so many children in favour of the possible achievements of a smaller number. We need an attitude in education all across Britain, and I'm not here criticising the Welsh Government, quite the opposite. We need an attitude across the whole of the country which says that every young person that comes through the school gates is there to be supported, nurtured, helped and educated, and not the pressure from outside on the teachers to do excessive testing and streaming and so on, which results in all kinds of dislocation, behaviour problems and underachievement in school. And we all pay the price for that. We need to be supporting our young people. And what the teachers' strikes at the moment coming up are, I think, as much about that as anything else, because teachers basically want to encourage the very best out of our children, and they're not able to do that because of the pressures they're put under all the time. And so there are other issues that we've got to face at the moment, and that is the levels of standard of living of so many families all across the country. Since 2010, we've had austerity in one form or the other. We had the Osborne budget, the Osborne-Cameron budget, supported by the Liberal Democrats in 2010, which took a sledgehammer and an axe to public services, and because of the Barnett formula system, obviously affected Wales enormously as well. And wage levels have not fundamentally risen higher than inflation at any time since 2010. The vast majority of families all across the country are now actually significantly worse off than they were 12 years ago. I'll come on to the current budget and what's in store for us there. And so there has to be a response to that. And that response has to be to understand that it's a political response that's needed, not one of offering a different form of economic management. Everything that we put forward in the manifestos of 2017 and 2019 was guided by the principle that this country is fundamentally unequal, getting more unequal, extolling the virtues of the rich, the super rich, and the fabulously super rich, doing nothing about tax evasion, tax avoidance, and tax havens, and at the same time underfunding local government and health, and treating every public service as an opportunity for somebody to make money out of it, rather than the fundamental provision being that of service. You might recall during the 2019 election, I was given some very interesting and very important papers about the trade talks that were going on between Britain and the United States, in secret, of course. And I was given these papers. I won't say where I got them from, but I was given them. But it certainly wasn't Russia. Those papers indicated that in the trade talks with the USA, the British government was saying, we will offer up unfettered access to American health companies to the UK health market. Just think that thing through, the UK health market.
It's not a market.
Exactly, well said. It's not a market, it's a service. It's not a market, it's a principle of public service. That is what the National Health Service is all about. Now, even the Tories recognise that if they go into an election saying we're going to abolish the NHS, they would get a bad time as a result of it. So instead, they interfere, undermine, atomise, carve up, slice up, dice up, and give away whole sections of our National Health Service. So when I pointed this out and said, actually, the trade deal they're proposing with the USA will result in privatisation of GP services and many other services, Boris Johnson said that was nonsense and it wasn't going to happen. I don't know why anybody would ever believe that man, but some apparently did. And the newspapers then received the information I'd given them. I gave them copies of the whole lot of the stuff we'd got on the trade talks. They then, one of them, I think it was probably the Daily Mail, they wouldn't want to be outdone on this one, announced it was all a Russian plot, and that I'd fallen for a plot from the Kremlin in order to create this panic. Well, not long after the election, an American company took over GP services in my own constituency. Not long after the election, a very large proportion of GP services in many parts of England are run by American companies. We are handing over our NHS to profit-centred providers all the time. And it's not a big jump between handing over the NHS to profit-centred providers to having the health service provided by profit-centred providers directly, and it's not a very big step after that to an insurance-based health system in which you pay for it and you get a service if you can afford it. We have got to stand up for the very principle of the National Health Service, free, universal, at the point of use. And that means getting rid of the private contractors and the whole principle of the internal market within the National Health Service. And the crisis the NHS is in at the moment is brought about by underfunding, it's brought about by the strategies of the NHS, which involve so much privatisation and endless debates within the service about who's going to pay for what, where and when. And you see the pictures, and they're true, of patients being treated in corridors, ambulance times being long delayed because the ambulance can't deliver the previous patient into the hospital because there's no one to go. So you talk to ambulance workers and they're stressed out of their lives. People don't go and work in the ambulance service in order not to help people. They do it because they want to deliver a service. And they do deliver that service where they can. But if they pick up somebody from an accident, take them into the hospital, then there's no way for them to be received, there's no treatment for them to get, there's no bed for them to go to. They remain in the ambulance, in the car park, outside the hospital. Down the road there's somebody else that has an emergency. Down the road there's another road accident. There's somebody else that needs help. The ambulance drivers are very stressed as a result of that. And so they have voted to take strike action in order to improve their pay, but also improve their conditions and the quality of the service. They're not striking against patients. They're not striking against the public. They're striking for the patients, for the public, and for the National Health Service. And we're going to have... We're going to have a lot of these arguments to deal with over the next few weeks. So it's as well that we prepare ourselves for them, because to be prepared is absolutely part of it. There's also just the levels of inequality within our society. You could draw a map of where the poorest children are, and you could draw a map of those that are going to end up getting to elite universities and going to get very good jobs at the end of it, and you could see the two places never come together. They just never come together. And so there is a lot that has to be done. First of all, on wages, and secondly, on education, health and opportunities that go with it. But we also then have to look at the quality of people's lives and the crisis that they're going through at the present time. Now, we have faced with a situation where we have high inflation, we have frozen wages, we have cuts in public services, and we have a massive growth in the charity sector and the whole idea of giving charity to help people. And I look at the advertisements to give money to people for Christmas, and to give money to food banks and give food to food banks and so on. They are brilliant, they're very clever, and they're very good at raising money. Probably everybody in this room gives support and help and money to food banks, food co-ops and everything else. We all do, because we do it as an act of solidarity. But I ask myself the question, why is it that in the 5th richest country in the world there should ever be any food banks anywhere? Why are they necessary? It just cannot be right that this country cannot afford to give decent enough wages that people can feed themselves with respect. And so I think we should be involved in all this mutual aid work. We should be doing all that. Trade unions, political activists, all should be. But never fail to draw the political lesson from it as to why it should not be necessary to do it at all. And that means the issues then of an alternative economic policy have to be seriously discussed. The economic strategy being put forward is first of all to say that everything is caused by COVID, and if it wasn't caused by COVID, it's caused by the Ukraine war, and if it's not caused by COVID and the Ukraine war, it's caused by Mick Lynch and the train workers, and if it's not caused by those four, it's probably Dave Ward and the postal workers, and after that, it's going to be the nurses and everybody else. There's always somebody else to blame, and then claiming that there's a 50 billion black hole that has got to be dealt with before we can do anything else. So I listened with interest, as Beth did, to Kwasi Kwarteng's brief tenure of office. I can't remember who the Prime Minister was at that time. If anybody can, answers on a postcard, please. Maybe. Heard the name somewhere, yeah. And that budget, I mean, I sat there and I couldn't believe my ears, actually. When he said that we're going to lower the rate of taxation for those earning over 150,000, and we're going to restore the banker's bonus, because that way, by having a lower rate of taxation, they will pay more money, which will come into the exchequer, which will trickle down and help people. I just sat there in total silence thinking, how does this work then? So they get charged less and pay less, but we're going to get more, and the poorest people are going to be better off because the very richest will have more disposable income, so they're going to spend it all in a corner shop in Merthyr and make sure that the children do well. I mean, wow. This was sort of Thatcherism revisited, this whole nonsense about trickle-down economics. Rich people, if they get even richer, do not spend it in the corner shop. They don't go down to Primark and buy a new set of clothes. They put it away in a tax haven somewhere else. They just do not spend it. They do not invest it. However, if you increase the universal credit rate for the entirety of those in receipt of universal credit, it is all spent straight away, because they need the money, they need to spend it. So you put money into the community by raising benefits, not taking it away from the community by cutting taxation at the top end. So it's those issues that we have to deal with. And that means an investment basis for our economy, as well as change in the taxation system. That is why I was very keen to put forward a national investment bank which would invest in developing new industries, develop green industrial revolution work, but also regional investment banks and national investment bank, obviously, for Wales and Scotland. And that would be the basis on which we'd go forward, and those would be run by local authorities and local interests within each of those areas. So it's not just London decision making, which has not done terribly well for many parts of the UK over the years. And the other side of it is the question of our industries and control of them. Inflation is caused by rising prices. What is the biggest factor in people's lives that has forced prices up at the moment? Energy costs as much as anything else. So the big six energy companies raised their prices by 95%. That 95% rise, the answer's down here somewhere, it's okay. The 95, or more falling, 95% rise in energy prices has then been protected by the government, who are subsidising those companies in order to maintain massive levels of profits, dividends and export of them. The French government, not a particularly left-wing government, nobody would accuse Macron of being a closet member of the Communist Party or anything else, has taken the entirety of its energy into public ownership. We should do exactly the same. To have a completely, I think you need a bigger lip on the thing here, you know what I mean? So by taking that into public ownership, that would mean the state could control the prices. Yes, I accept there has been a global rise in energy prices, but surely the function of government is to moderate its population against that by taking the hit in order to defend the prices and thus defend the living standards of people. So when I come across constituents of mine who cannot literally afford to heat the place, cannot afford to turn the light on, and are just terrified of what a cold winter could bring, well, what are we about? What are we doing? And so when the government says people are not accessing the help to heat schemes, they probably don't understand what they are. The issue has to be control the prices so people can make their own choices, not go through something like that. That means public ownership of it. But then the other privatisations that have happened since Tel Cid and those days, you remember that? What we did was sold off public industries, all of them well below market value, allowed the speculators to get control of them, and they would then greedily sell off many of the land-based assets of those and reap a huge profit from them and cut down on maintenance and all the other things. Look at the water industry, particularly for the English water companies. Last year in England alone, there were 400,000 discharges of sewage into rivers and the sea. That pollutes everybody's sea, because rivers are not very interested in national borders, they flow. And so that level of pollution makes the seas worse, it's fish life and everything else, makes bathing impossible. And the number of pipe bursts and waste of water is enough to fill the whole of Loch Ness every year with wasted water, because they've cut back on maintenance of the pipe work. And all the while, the profits taken from the water industry are absolutely enormous, all of which are exported to hedge funds in various parts around the world. There is no justification whatsoever anywhere for water, our most basic of all needs, not being in total public ownership and public control. To me, that is absolutely essential. So again, you can then control prices, and you can also make sure you have good quality water and you're not polluting our natural world, our environment. I mean, you've seen what happened with the privatisation of coal, the money that was made at the sale of assets, and we're still going through the issues surrounding the miners' pension fund and the compensation schemes, and the issues of ill health that derive from that industry. And so post-privatisation, this magic world that was supposed to be created, the same people are back in office now proposing the same economic nonsense that Thatcher and Heseltine were proposing in the 80s. It's just different people with the same fundamental message. They're protecting inequality, they're protecting the rich, they're protecting the biggest businesses, they're protecting the tax havens, and they're not, absolutely not, investing in working class communities all over this country. And the other big dispute going on, which I've mentioned already, is of course the postal workers dispute. Now the postal workers, I think, deserve decent pay and conditions, and I think they also need more respect for what they actually do. Because if you're a postal worker delivering letters or working in the sorting office, you're prepared to get up very early in the morning to do it. You are part of the community and enjoy being a positive part of that community. What they don't want and don't like is the speed-ups, the pressures, the electronic management of them, and in return for the last pay offer, which has not been accepted by the union, they then said there would have to be a change in the clocking in and clocking out system, so that if a postal delivery worker delivered their round ahead of time, then that time would be added on to the following day's work. And so if you finish 15 minutes early because you've done your work and you've delivered it all, you don't get that time off. You get it back on the following day, and so it goes on. So you end up with some crazy banking system between the individual and Royal Mail. Well, where's the point in that? And how many managers will it take to monitor this crazy system? So you'd end up with some whole miasma of management deciding how many minutes per day each postal worker had done. And you tell you what, the more they finish early, the greater load they'd be given and the fewer postal workers there would be in the future. It's all about speeding up and stressing postal workers. And so this dispute is not just about wages, it's also about conditions and the role in which management plays. And Royal Mail, despite claiming to lose money, is posting enormous profits. Its chief executive is paid $745,000 a year and apparently has earned a bonus. I'm not quite sure what the bonus is for, but a bonus is about to be paid, apparently. And so we have a privatised postal system. So you have the three crucial things you need in your life: power, water, and communications, all of which have been privatised. And the claim that the privatisation of Royal Mail was going to be different from all the others and it was going to be almost a cooperative working arrangement, it don't feel like that in any sorting office anywhere around the country. And I hear this on the picket lines every single day. So for all the abuse they're getting, let's stand by the posties, stand by the rail workers. Make sure that we win this thing, and I think we will. But it's about alternatives. It's about developing a political narrative of a political alternative. The idea of us working class communities being disempowered is what runs thick through what the Tory government is proposing. There has to be an alternative. An alternative that merely says the next government will manage the economy in a different and better way is not enough. It simply is not enough. So there has to be, fundamentally, a redistribution of power and wealth within our society. I'll tell you what, if you say anything in favour of redistribution of power and wealth in our society, the media come down on you big time. They don't like that. They don't like that at all because they like the levels of inequality that we've got in our society. That is why we've got to look at how we communicate with each other. We've got to also look at how we teach history and economics in our schools. Artin and Laura from the Peace and Justice Project are here today. They're giving out some leaflets from our project about setting up news clubs around the country. The idea being that people come together, they don't have to be journalists, come together to look at the way news is disseminated, the values that go with that news, what we're allowed to hear about, and how we can set up our own alternatives. The only daily paper that is not owned by private interest systems is the Morning Star, which thankfully has managed to survive all these years, and it now seems to be bigger and better than ever. I read it, and I indeed write for it occasionally. And so I do think we've got to look at alternatives. And people say, well, we've got the internet. The internet's fine. You can use the internet for anything you like. Well, can you? Well, really, can you? Elon Musk has bought Twitter. I'm sure he did it as a charitable act. He just felt like making sure that Twitter was there for everybody to use for the future, any more than Facebook, Google, or all the others. Don't be fooled that there's complete freedom on the internet. Don't be fooled in that way at all. There are obvious concerns about levels of abuse on social media, and I empathise with that because occasionally if I put something up, I read the responses I get. 90% of them are very nice, and some are unbelievable, really abusive stuff. But it's also about the power of those companies to do two things. One is to send you into a particular direction by the use of algorithms, so they decide what they think you're interested in and send you off in that direction. So you end up reading the news they think you ought to read, reading the posts they think you ought to read. Now, I don't want to sound too conspiratorial here, but look at what happened in election campaigns in the USA, in Australia, here, Canada, many European elections, where there is a lot of evidence about the use of algorithms in order to direct people in certain directions, and without making it very public, going to the most amazing levels of personal abuse against individual politicians. I'm one of those that got that level, all created by these systems. So we need to think very carefully about access to it. And then on a more blunt level, the big media corporations, all of which are American-based and American-owned, can and do shut down all internet access when it suits them. Think of the Indian farmers. What were they doing? The Indian farmers were protesting in New Delhi against the change in the agricultural system in India, away from a guaranteed price mechanism, which meant farmers growing rice or whatever other crop they were growing, rice and wheat were the main ones, would get a guaranteed price paid for by the government in much the same way as post-war Britain brought in an agricultural system which guaranteed farmers' prices. The Indian government was trying to get rid of this under pressure from the World Bank and others on the basis of opening up the Indian market. In other words, flooding it with cheaper grain from the United States, which would then force the prices down in India and thus force a lot of farmers into bankruptcy or worse. And the levels of suicide amongst Indian farmers are absolutely huge. They quite rightly protested. They went and occupied central New Delhi to take part in that protest. At a crucial point, when they were starting negotiations with the government and mobilising a lot of other people, 1 billion people took strike action in support of them on one day, all around the world. Not that our media ever told you about that. All their internet access and mobile phones were closed down, just like that. That is the power those companies have. Be very careful about it. Don't think there's all those total freedoms there. That's why we need to be serious about looking at how we communicate with each other and what the alternatives actually are. And so, if you've got thoughts on it, let's work together and try and share those. Because I want us to live in a world where we do have a more sustainable world, a more sustainable environment, a more equal world, and a more peaceful world. But it's also about how we treat our young people. I said something about them earlier on. What was inspiring to me in the last two general elections was the numbers of young people that came out enthusiastic and hopeful, asking the obvious question: why should I go into debt to go to college? Why should I get a debt of 50 or 60,000 just to go to university? And why should I not get access to housing and have to pay so much in the private rented sector just to get somewhere to live? Asking very basic and very reasonable questions. And I was accused of saying, well, actually, what you're doing by ending university fees and bringing back a grant system is subsidising the middle class to go to university. I said, no, it's the absolute opposite of that. By making university education free, as it once was, and returning a grant system as we used to have, a maintenance grant system, you're giving every young person a genuine choice of going to college, going to university, going to an apprenticeship, or whatever is best for them, whatever they want to do. But the idea that you would penalise somebody for going to university with a £60,000 debt, which will increase with an increasing interest rate over the rest of their lifetime, seems to me just completely wrong in every conceivable way. Wrong even in an economic interest, because you're actually denying us the benefits of many very well-trained and educated people because they can't afford to get that training and get that education. So let's make it a central theme of everything we do: totally free education from cradle to grave. As with the principle of the National Health Service, because poverty is such a waste. A child living in a substandard home, going to an underfunded school, underachieving in school. We're losing the doctor, the nurse, the engineer, the lawyer, the teacher of tomorrow in the poverty in which they are brought up at the present time. So it is about giving people real hope. Yeah. And a society where we understand where we've come from. Now, I know the Welsh Government has already made some steps in this direction about the teaching of history in our schools, because our children are not brought up to be empowered by their own history. They're brought up to be deferential of the process of history. So you're taught there was a king here, there was a queen there was a bit of a doubt who it was there, and so on and so on and so on, all the way through. And our history is taught as though the whole thing relies around a succession of the royal families. And you go on and on with this. So you sort of think that's the Victorian era, that was the Tudor. It's always, every era is named around whichever royal family was on the throne at that time. I want our children to grow up feeling empowered. Empowered by what the Chartists said in the 19th century, empowered by what the Peasants' Revolt said, empowered by the parliamentarians in the Civil War, empowered by all of that. And on a global reach, well, let's look at it. Slavery happened because it was evil, and is evil. It happened because a whole population was told that people living in Africa were somehow or other subhuman, therefore it was okay to make them into slaves. Those attitudes then play out into racist beliefs down the generations and down the decades. Let's bring up our children to understand global history as well as their local and their national history, to understand that our learning, our maths, our science, our engineering didn't all come from here, didn't all come from Europe, didn't all come from any one place. It came from the entire world. Our learning is an aggregation of the power, the thoughts and learning over the whole world. And I want our children to be brought up understanding that as the most effective way of defeating racism and racist ideas. And you see how the racist ideas play out day in, day out. The papers report that the country is being invaded by refugees on the Kent coast. Loaded words, very strong language. The numbers of people that have come in a whole year to the Kent coast in those terrible and dangerous dinghies is less than the number of people that attend a League One match every week in football. They have got to be desperate. Okay, I'm not in favour of people traffickers. I think they're pretty disgusting people. But you've got to be pretty desperate to go into some leaky dinghy, to go across a dangerous shipping lane just to try and survive. Can't we replace this language of hate with a language of humanity and an understanding of why there are so many refugees around the world? They're victims of war. They're victims of environmental destruction. They're victims of human rights abuse. They're victims of many things. In a different situation, any of us could be like that. Let's hold out a hand of humanity and support rather than the language of abuse, which then ends up ultimately in desperate people living in poverty, being beaten up on our streets by the far right. It is about that sense of unity. Not always an easy argument to put across, and when Keir Hardie was a miners' union official in Scotland, there was an argument at one of the pits that he was involved with organising that there were too many Lithuanian miners coming and they had to prevent them joining the union and only allowed Scottish people to join the union and not allow Lithuanians to join the union. I'm sure that some of the same arguments took place in Wales against Polish miners and so on. And so what did Keir Hardie do? He said, leave it with me, I'll sort it out. And they said, what are you going to do? So he came back with leaflets about joining the union in English and Lithuanian. And said, bring them all into the union, because it's the working class unity that we need to bring people together. And so I just want to finish to give you a message of hope if I can. I had a great privilege a few weeks ago to go to Brazil to witness the last stages of the presidential election. And I've known Lula, the president, for a long time. He's been president twice before and managed to bring about a depreciation, a lowering of the terrible levels of poverty, particularly in the north and east of Brazil. He was subject to what can only be described as a lawfare pursuit against him, as was Dilma Rousseff, his successor as president. He was accused of corruption, he was accused of all kinds of things, and indeed during the days that we were there he was even accused of devil worship by some of the newspapers. So it's not a concept that comes up very much in discourse in politics here. Devil worship, yeah, okay. And he was then removed from office, and he was then held in prison for 500 days. in prison, the president, guilty of absolutely nothing. Eventually, he won the case legally by some very brilliant lawyers pointing out that international law, which Brazil had signed up to, superseded local law in the defence of the political rights of an individual. So he won that and eventually was released from prison, to great acclaim of his supporters who were outside the prison every single day supporting him. And we sent him support, of course, during all that time. And he then fought the election campaign. The right-wing candidate Bolsonaro, incredibly well-funded, supported by all the media, fought also a very strong campaign. And we were there to witness the last few days of the campaign. And what impressed me about Lula's campaign was, one, the efficiency and the dedication of the left coalition that was supporting him, but also that they hadn't been triangulating on everything they did. They said, well, we'll please this interest group here, we'll please this group there, we'll be nice to this business there and that business there, and all will be fine. They said, no, we are here to deliver for the people living in the favelas, to deliver for the landless people and the homeless people across the country. And it was a very close election, and we're there in Sao Paulo. The day before the election, they're not allowed to campaign, but instead they sort of just all decided to walk along the main thoroughfare, all 500,000 people, just happened to be holding placards for Lula. It's not campaigning, it's just informing people, that's all. So he was on a lorry, but didn't say anything, just hi, hi, hi. Great stuff, well, brilliantly done. And then we're there when the results are coming in, and we're watching the screens. And he's way behind to begin with, and then as we got to about 2/3 of the votes being counted, it suddenly goes Lula 50.01%, Bolsonaro 49.99. They all started cheering. I said, hang on a minute, you've still got 1/3 of the votes to be counted. It's not done yet. Anyway, he did win by just about 1%, which equates to quite a lot of votes in Brazil. It's a very big country. But in his acceptance speech, what did he say? Brazil is a country that exports food and leaves starving children behind. Brazil is a country that has the most amazing biodiversity rainforest, the Amazon rainforest, on the planet. We will feed the children and we will protect the rainforest at the same time. We will redistribute power and wealth at the same time. We're no longer going to live in a country that is so grotesquely unequal that children die on the streets. And he said all of this straight away after the election and set himself out the targets of what that government would achieve. And I just thought the power of somebody to go from prison to president in such a short time shows an amazing strength and an amazing level of consciousness. And we were in some of the poorest communities that had community kitchens, and those community kitchens were also a point of discussion about the election. Point of discussion about what it's about and what they're going to achieve in the future. That sense of hope is there. So don't run away with the idea that the economic orthodoxy of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank controls everything, will run everything in the future. There are a lot of changes going on around the world, and it's up to us as an informed and hopefully very effective labour movement in this country to be part of that global process of a different economic agenda and a different strategy and an environmentally sustainable one, and also a strategy for peace in the world. I hold no brief whatsoever for the Russian invasion of Ukraine. It is simply wrong, period. But the war has to end at some point. It is completely wrong. The war has to end at some point. If they're capable of coming together to agree on grain exports, then surely to goodness they can come together to agree on stopping the fighting and working out a future which works for everybody. How many more thousands of people are going to be forced into exile, dead in the Ukraine, or conscripted Russian soldiers killed in this ridiculous and useless war? Can we not raise the voice for peace in the world and say to the UN and others, you should be the brokers for that peace as quickly as you possibly can? And so that to me is the important message that we have to give to globally and locally. We can achieve a different economic process in Britain by raising benefits, by increasing tax at the top end, by redistributing wealth in that way, by investing in housing, by investing in the future of our young people. We can achieve all of these things. It's not going to be handed to us on a plate. If we step back and get nervous about putting forward radical policies, we won't gain the respect of anybody as a result of that. They will just be ignorant of us and say, well, what are you offering? What I'm finding so fascinating is that in all these disputes that are going on at the moment, there's a real thirst for discussion amongst those that support the rail workers, teachers, postal workers, and so on. And also those that are supporting housing campaigns, anti-racist campaigns, civil liberties campaigns, and all the rest of it. There's a real political movement that's growing up there on the streets. So I think as more industrial action takes place, more unified action takes place, we need the unions working like that together. It's not a competition between unions. We need them all working closely together to achieve that kind of change and that sort of solidarity. And then we can look to 2023 as a year when we turn the corner against the nastiness and bankruptcy of this Tory government, turn the corner with that demand based on working class communities all over the UK for equality and social justice in a world of peace. That's what Esso wanted, that's what Keir Harding wanted, that's what we all want. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much. It's wonderful to be here. Thanks a lot. See you all in a minute. You need a microphone, do you?
So you can see why there was no argument on who we were going to invite down to this year's SO. Every year we invite somebody down and we give them an appropriate present. Last time we piled him up with a load of cheese, didn't we? So this time, I don't know if anyone has been to the Art of Amy in Cleveland Street. She is absolutely superb. So we gave her a rough idea of what we wanted. We wanted Jeremy Corbyn, S O Davis, our banner. When he came and spoke during the leadership elections, he spoke from the Red House. So we wanted the Red House there, and we made a load of red flags which went to Swansea and never came back. So what we've done is we've had this drawn by the Art of Amy, and she is absolutely... Are you here, Amy? Stand up and take a bow. I'm sure she's here somewhere. She's done this fabulous... She's put it all into a montage. So, Jeremy, that's your Tina, have you got the raffle tickets?
That's amazing.
It's lovely, isn't it? She does really well. She's a fabulous little artist. Oh, Shirley's finished. Yeah. So who's representing that? I haven't got it, Tom.
No problem, of course.
What do you then? All right. Right, okay.
I like the symbol on your phone.
Have you all got your raffle tickets? We've got 2 prizes today. First one was donated by Kynwyn Starter, who is fabulous here in the front row. It's a bottle of House of Commons whiskey signed by Jeremy himself. So,
I don't even drink.
no,
I've got a ticket.
Seven 731 to 735. Come and fetch it.
Careful, the top isn't very good, Max.
And this one as well. Yeah. That's for your jam. Go on then, yeah. That's okay. So the next prize Jeremy brought down with him today, it's plum jam made from his plum tree. And signed by him. And it's 491 to 495.
Hope you enjoy it.
Right, so, couple of thank yous now. Thank you to Kynwyn for donating the bottle of whiskey. On the subject of what Jeremy said, Morning Star, People's Press, it's owned by us. We can buy shares in it. We ordered a load this morning. If you haven't picked it up at the back up there. So thanks to Tommy for organising the Morning Stars. Thanks to Beth, because Beth is absolutely outstanding. She turns up on every picket line that she can. The newest Trades Council in Wales is the Cynon Valley Trades Council, who has unstinting support. So we've got one of the oldest Trades Councils here in Merthyr and the newest over in Aberfan. So massive thanks to Beth for all the support that she gives to them. Last one now then, we've got Rob Griffiths, who wrote the Esso Davis book. He gave Jeremy the book the last time he was here doing the Esso Davis Memorial Lecture. He's updated it since, so over to you, Rob.
Thanks very much, Max. I'm afraid, Jeremy, you're doomed to have a new edition of this book every time you come to Merthyr. But all I can say, it's got a lot of new material in it. This isn't a sales pitch. I think we've already sold all the copies we brought with us today, but we'll have copies next Friday. This isn't a sales pitch, but there is so much new material in here about Esso as a miner's agent in the anthracite during the First World War, about the opening of all of his mail when he was a miner's agent in Dowlais by the intelligence services. We've got those records out into the open. When he visited Nazi Germany during the Hitler regime to demand the release of the leader of the Communist Party, Ernst Thälmann. There is so much more new material. We've given it a new title this time, and it's very suitable, I think, to present this to Jeremy. The new title is Reddest of the Reds. S O Davies, MP and miners leader, but Jeremy, you're in the home of the red flag. Merthyr, the workers of Merthyr gave the red flag to the world.
Correct.
So I'm delighted to give you the latest edition of this biography of Esso Davis.
Rob, thank you very much. And the first edition was great. This, I'm sure, is even better. And I think we should just thank Rob for the work he does on researching history, because history brings to life the struggles that people have been through for so long. And this is what our young people should be reading as well as understanding. And it's how children learn that's important, and how we mobilise for struggles. But I just remind you, Laura Alvarez, my wife's over there, who puts up with an awful lot on behalf of the great cause for socialism. She's got leaflets for the Peace and Justice Project news clubs we're doing it. Artin is over there. Artin Giles, who's working with us and organising. He's over there now, I think. He's moved. Oh, they're on the bookstore. Lovely, thanks. And what he's doing is Artin's organising with the Bakers Union to try to get a union organisation at Samworth's Bakeries, which is a big bakery chain. That's going to be a long and very important struggle. But we're also involved in supporting Starbucks workers in joining a union, because we cannot ignore the numbers of people that are working in gig economy and fast food industry who are not protected and need that union recognition. So we'll be here for a while, so we can, if you need to get any more information, talk to either of them, please. Artin's over there and Laura's down here. Thank you very much. And Rob, thank you very much.
So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for coming. You've been superbly behaved. Fair play to you. You can tell I do loads in schools, can't I? So all that's left then is very Merry Christmas to you all, but turn up on those picket lines. Thank you.